What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick,
My name is Dave.
and this is the Deep Dive, and it's a special, at least for when we're recording, St. Patrick's Day version.
It is.
Which you don't have any green on, so this is very disappointing, actually.
I actually had a little green shamrock on my jacket. I took my jacket off. We're recording this on Sunday, obviously.
That's right.
It's St. Pat's Day, and a lot of people wearing green today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you do, right? You don't want to get pinched.
Yes.
Anyway, we're still in our series, though, this Witness at the Cross, and today we're talking about the women who were there at the cross and or watching from afar, Scripture kind of says, and I'm ready to get into it. Are you?
Yes, do it.
Go. All right, Dave. This morning in church, I just want to tell people we did something a little different and a little fun. Jeanette Curtin came in and just started taping a box, and I was like, "Why are we taping a box on the floor?" And she goes, "It's a clap box."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What is a clap box?" And she ends up showing me this video that I guess at like Disney and stuff like that, this is something that's pretty prevalent. They just tape boxes, and a crew will kind of just be around there, and anytime somebody steps in it, they'll clap. And I tell you, it was quite a sight to watch. Like even like social, like a society kind of thing. Like some people were very adamant about walking straight through it, and some people were like, "There's a box on the floor. I'm not going to touch it." You know, like they just walked around.
They knew it was going. You know, and I think part of that goes to that. Well, first of all, I'm glad to know the origin of it. It was from Jeanette. I just assumed it was a Sarah thing. It seems so much like a Sarah thing,
right?
But good for her. But yeah, you know, and I still like. I don't like calling attention to my birthday.
Right.
My birthday is tomorrow.
Yep.
But you know, they sang "Happy Birthday" to me in church.
Yes, we did.
And so I was thinking about that in correlation to the clap box.
Yeah.
In that it is embarrassing.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of some people are hams and they're, you know, but it is embarrassing, but it does feel good.
Yeah.
And so I think it really brought a lift to church this morning. I think people are coming up in to get that little affirmation coming in. So that was fun.
There were a couple people who just kind of looked around like, "What just happened?" And then there were a couple people who were like, "Yeah, clap for me. This is great." You know what I mean? So
I saw one little girl who got in there and just wouldn't get out.
Yeah, we just kept clapping.
It's like 5 minutes of clapping. Yeah,
it was fun.
That was fun.
Well, Dave, why don't you kind of jump on into the sermon that you taught today, and let's deep dive at some.
I almost lost count of which week we are in. This is 5, I think. Number 5.
Yeah, I think so.
Number 5. But, you know, in Lent, to the last few weeks, we have been looking at the events around the crucifixion of Jesus, which we call Good Friday, and the people that are there, and going into some detail about the different characters and things that we can learn, both, you know, the cautionary bad stuff, but also maybe the things that are good that can move us.
Yeah.
And so the last couple of weeks, I think we've had a couple of good ones with that. Well, the last 3 weeks, we had the Roman centurion. Then we had the beloved disciple last week. But this week we had the women. And I you know, it was a great chance to look at how important women were in the gospel story.
Yeah.
Not just at the crucifixion or resurrection, but the entire gospel story. And I made the point, and I'd love to hear your comments on this too. The church could not function without women.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely.
It's not even close.
No.
I really appreciate that you said that. And then it kind of made me think, because, I've been in ministry almost 15 years myself, and at the center of just about everything I've ever done, whether it be trips or youth musicals or volunteers, bringing food, like, women have been there.
Yeah.
They've really been an anchor of everything I've seen done at the church. So I thought that was very nice that you mentioned that.
And I just think about the women who have been not just like those workers and those servers, but the women that have been leaders in churches that I've served, including Hickory Flat.
Yeah.
And, just the thoughtfulness that I think sometimes we have in our society, sort of this male corporate model, and women leadership is different in a lot of ways, and I think it's more nurturing for the church.
Yeah.
And I've watched women who have sat in positions like chair of SBR, for example, and other places as well.
Yeah.
And then I think back to when I've been doing this a long time, and so women pastors, they've been women. There've been women pastors my entire career,
Sure.
but it's probably over 50% now women pastors. But as I was in seminary, and the colleagues that I had that I looked at and said, if I was looking for a pastor, who would it be?
Yeah.
Who's going to be a great pastor coming out of my seminary class? It would have been one of the women for sure.
Yeah.
Because their thoughtfulness in preaching, but also their care and compassion. And so, I'm really appreciative of this. This is not Women's History Month, and but I just think it was good to be able to acknowledge that. And the way that Mark does it, and just to give a little bit of the text if you didn't see the sermon, in Mark's gospel, which is the shortest, you go through the events of the crucifixion, starting back, and I guess we should, to the garden scene. You have Peter, James, and John with them. And then you get to the cross, and you hear from a few people, all men. And then he dies, and the Roman centurion says, surely this man was the Son of God. And then it kind of makes a switch to the women.
Yep.
Because then, and he mentions, almost as an afterthought, there were women there throughout his ministry. They followed him up from Galilee into Jerusalem. And there were women there. And all four Gospels talk about the women at the cross, all four of them. There's three named in this particular Gospel. And I think Mark has sort of a literary thing he's doing if you're sort of analyzing. He's got the three, Peter, James, and John. And then he's got two Marys, Mary Magdalene and Mary, who was
other Mary.
Another Mary. And then Salome, who was James and John's mother. But he mentions these women, and we'll get to why in a second. But from there, then you get into the Easter Sunday morning, and they're front and center Sunday morning. They are the first people there. They're the first people to come back and say he's risen.
Yeah.
So all of that is there. And so why? And part of the reasons were men weren't there.
Yeah.
They left, except for maybe John.
Yeah. A lot of them just fled, or
They fled,
kind of went into hiding.
Yeah, and the risk was there for the women as much as it was for the men. But
Yeah.
they said they stood and and watched. But there is this parallel that Mark is making with naming the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, who were there, and Jesus is asking them to stay awake with him because he's going to pray. And you can only imagine, just as a friend to friend, look, I'm going through something right now. I need my guys with me.
Yeah.
This is the dark night of the soul tonight. I need my guys with him. And they kept going to sleep.
Yeah.
And he's like, 3 times he's coming back and saying, you couldn't just stay awake.
Can you please help?
Can you not empathize with what is going on here?
I'm going through some things up here, and you're just over here snoozing.
Yeah. And so then you get to the crucifixion, and there's those 3 named women. And then they're the first ones to go to the cross. And it's the same 3 that are named again. They show up at the cross, and I don't think I really pointed this out in the scripture, but it says that they bought the spices and stuff because they would not have had them because they weren't expecting Jesus to get killed.
Right.
So they've gone out, rushed out, got the spices to do a proper burial.
Yeah.
But they do know that there's this. They don't know what they're going to do about this stone that's there, and so they're kind of, what are we going to do about this big stone? And they get there, and it's gone.
Yeah.
And as I said this morning during the service, we'll finish that up on Easter Sunday morning.
Yeah.
We're not going to get ahead of ourselves there. But A.J. Levine, Amy Jill Levine, who wrote the book, draws attention to this, and I never had noticed it before, and I think it's a great point from a literary position to look and to study this, and why is she just naming these 3?
Mm-hmm.
And the point she's making is you've got 3 men and 3 women. They're equally named, but they equally fell. Okay, so that I bumped on that when I read that in the book.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the women fell. I get the point she's trying to make, And I do know that they're not perfect. None of us are perfect. We've all failed.
Yeah.
The disciples in the garden definitely failed. In this case, I don't think the women failed because they were there.
Yeah.
They were there. And they were there at the crucifixion, and they were there at the resurrection. And yeah, they didn't. They failed to do what they were going to do for Jesus with putting spices and all that stuff, but they were there. They showed up, and so
But I
yeah,
mean, it's kind of a beautiful thing though, because, that was the ritual for somebody who was dead and buried, but he wasn't. I mean, he was for the 3 days, but he rose, right? So,
right, yeah. They
you know,
and I was just thinking about like after a death, what do we do? I mean, part of it is just going through the motions. If you've lost someone, I don't know.
yeah,
Particularly, about I've lost both my father and my mother and my little brother, as I talked about in church this morning, and my sister and all. And those first moments and first days, you're just kind of going through the motions of what can we do.
yeah.
And so there's things to attend to. There's a service to attend to, or you got to notify people.
Especially when things happen so fast.
Well,
This wasn't like they saw it coming from a mile away, so they could prepare much. It was,
as those going through it,
yeah,
from a perspective of somebody who's giving care, we're also asking those questions. What can we do? And so we make casseroles, right?
right,
Casseroles or cards, or make going calls, and you're always asking, what can I do? What can I do? And in those moments, the person who's bereaved lots of times doesn't know
yeah,
what we can do. There's such hard times and hard moments. But the greater point, I think, is they were there. It was the ministry of presence.
yeah,
And so I shared a story from my ministry, actually, the first church I was ever appointed to, the first week that I was there, of a suicide that happened to a family member. As a mother, her son, adult son, committed suicide. And just, I was green as green could be.
yeah,
I did not know what I was doing. Anybody can stand up and preach,
mm-hmm.
and I had preached a few times, and, I preached my first Sunday there, but, that's where you learn in ministry. There is a whole lot more to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm driving to go there, and I'm thinking, what in the world am I going to say? And I remembered the dark night of my soul when my little brother was killed in a car wreck. And in the middle of the night, the preacher from our church showed up.
yeah,
Don't remember anything he said. Don't remember even if he had a prayer with us, which I'm sure he did. But I remember that he was there. And to this day, it means so much, just the ministry of presence. Of people that have had that happen, they're the ones that will return that.
yeah,
And how that had an effect on me. And I've had, unfortunately, a number of occasions where I've had to go and show up in those situations. And one of our church members was a person when his son died, and he came up after the church today and was thanking me for that. But I said, John, the reason, one of my driving reasons was the memory of this night.
yeah,
And I knew that if me and the youth pastor went, and I said, if we showed up, then the church was showing up. And he wasn't a member of our church, wasn't a member of any church at that time. I said, if we came, we were representing something. And, out of that, became great friends with John and all. But there's been others is too. If you had an occasion either way where you've practiced the ministry of presence or have had someone who was just there with you during those times?
yeah. No, I've had experiences in both scenarios, but I'll share one that was for me is, when my grandfather passed away. Man, I don't even remember how long ago it was, but John Merck, he was the pastor here.
Yeah.
My grandfather never stepped foot in church, like had nothing to do with church, at least here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he just kind of was living his life. And I just, the family was looking for a pastor. They knew I was doing like a small internship at the church. They're like, do you know anybody? And I asked Herzen, and Herzen wasn't available. So I asked John, and he showed up, and he talked to the family, got the stories all together. And really, I don't remember a thing he said at the service,
Yeah.
but the fact that he was there and he made it feel like remembering my grandfather was important to him as well. It just rubbed everybody right. You know what I mean? And I think it's just a beautiful thing of just being willing and being present in those spaces.
Yeah, and it's interesting in this text. The women, there are lines in the text. You
Yeah.
have the thieves on the cross; they've got lines in the text. You've got the Roman centurion; he's got lines. The women have no lines,
Mhm.
and I think there's a point to be drawn from that. Is that like sometimes no words are better than some words.
Yeah.
You know, and I know in some situations I can think from the receiving end. I've been going through some difficult things and would have a friend, and I knew that they were well intended, but they would want to come and sit with me and
Say the perfect thing
say
or
the
whatever.
perfect thing, and pray the perfect prayer and offer me some spiritual wisdom insights. And I get it.
Yeah.
I they were trying, and I love them for trying, but it wasn't particularly helpful.
Yeah.
And it's the friends who have just come and just sat and been there with me
Yep.
and just saying, "Man, that's horrible. I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And
I've had people even say stuff like, "I have no idea what to say,
Yeah.
but I'm giving you a hug or whatever," and it's like
exactly. There's
that.
no
That
words.
made me feel just as good as somebody who tried to offer a piece of wisdom or whatever.
And like me, when I was driving to this church member's house that first Sunday morning,
Mhm.
my mind was going like, "Well, I'm the preacher. I should have the perfect, thing to say
Yeah.
to her." And that's why I just really feel like the Holy Spirit put Mac Tribbles, this occasion when he came to my family in that time, and realized he might have done that. I can't remember, but it was the presence of being there.
Right.
And I've learned a lot more about ministry of presence over the year. It's actually, I didn't even know the term then. It's like, you ever had these things where I don't know what it is, but here's a name for it. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes perfect sense.
Yep.
That's what how the ministry of presence has been. I experienced it before I knew what it was called.
Right.
I practiced it before I knew kind of a term that people use a lot. And we've mentioned Stephen ministry a lot in this podcast, but we have a real active, great Stephen ministry group here. But a lot of their training, because I've done it,
Yep.
is around the ministry of presence. Just being there with people when they're going through something, just saying like, "Hey, I'm here for you." And so the women, they were there. They have no lines. And on the cross, this isn't said, but I think it can be implied in the verse that it had to have been a comfort of Jesus to look out of this crowd. And we've already heard about the bystanders and the scoffers. We've already heard about the soldiers that mocked him. We've heard about all of these other people, and also looking and not seeing his guys,
Yeah.
how that might have felt.
Mm.
But looking and seeing these women who Mark has reminded us have been there all along, how that, you would think would have brought him some comfort there.
Yeah.
And that is such a great example for us as well to put into practice. And so, yeah, as we're, kind of winding down, I had 2 points at the end that I made that I think are important about the ministry of presence. And one is, I think what can make it particularly effective is that there's already a relationship there.
Yep.
Now, like in the case of like when I went and visited this woman, I had just met her one time.
Right.
And so sometimes I think, and I know, and going back to my friend John lost a son, and I know he has driven halfway across the state to go to the funeral home visitation of some other parent who has lost a child, because he knows how it feels. He understands. He knows how it feels.
Yeah.
And so, he may not know them, but I think that ministry of presence is powerful. But in a lot of cases, it is the friends.
Yeah.
I think when my dad died, and at the end, after everything was over, and the funeral had been in Dunwoody, and my dad was buried up in Gwinnett County near Lake Lanier.
Mm.
And so, I had some friends that had come to the funeral, lots of friends that came to the funeral and supported me there. But, the family goes back to the cemetery. And so I'm there at the cemetery, and I look around, and there's 3 or 4 of my best friends in ministry, preachers, who came there. And, they're busy. Preachers are busy.
Yeah.
But like, they had driven an hour to come there just to stand with me by my father's grave.
Yeah.
And that meant the world because, I remember saying to him, it's like, I can't believe y'all came. You came to the funeral. I can't believe you came all the way back up here. And and one of them said to me, I never will forget, he says, did you think we had anything else better to do than to come and be with you in these moments?
Mm-hmm.
This is important.
Yeah.
And so, that meant the world. But that was based on the relationship that we had before.
Right.
And so I think within the church context, we're with each other in the good times and the bad times through the cancer treatments, through the kid graduating from college, from the weddings, baptisms, those sort of things, so we can celebrate and form those relationships, so that when they come, this tough time comes, those relationships are already formed, and we can lean and support on one another.
Yeah. I heard a quote one time, and I don't remember if it was kind of like for youth ministry or what, but it basically said that people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel.
Right.
And and it was one of those things that just really set a tone in me of just this idea of just being present in people's world, and also giving them space to like be their authentic self, whether they're upset in a hard time or happy in a good time, but just to also like come beside and celebrate with them for some of these things.
Can you say that again? I like the way that was phrased.
The quote?
Yeah.
Oh man, now you're putting me back on. It was, it's not about people won't remember what you say, but how you make them feel.
Right.
And I just think it's beautiful.
I like that. There's another quote that I know that no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yep.
But I like that is a different kind of lens to look through.
Yeah.
Because really it is, we shouldn't be necessarily led all the times by our feelings, because our feelings can be fickle. But the truth is, we are feeling emotional people.
Yeah.
And so I think the relationships and the heart forming stuff is born out of those feelings that God has given us.
Yeah, and I think especially when you have a good relationship, it's not necessarily some deep thing, but as you're talking about the about presence and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, friends showing up at funerals or popping in places where it makes you feel valued and important in their world. You know what I mean? Like your pastor friend says, do you think we had a better place to be?
Never,
you know what I mean?
And I know, and it's something you'll never forget.
Yeah.
And it does transform you, and it does, I think, compel you to do it for someone else.
Right.
And I just think that's part of the gospel spreading.
Yeah.
Is where, we are there, bearing one another's burdens.
Right.
As we talked about last week. So, yeah. So this has been a good series. And I do disagree with Amy Jo Levine with that one point. But it's been a great book.
Yeah.
And it's been a great series. And I think it's opened in my mind and challenged me to some things. I was talking to another friend after church today, and she was saying, this has been the best Lent. And honestly, I mean, that felt good for her to say that to me. But I would say this is like the most memorable, favorite Lenten series I've ever done.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed
going through
it.
And I think we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but it's just nice to look at it through a few different lenses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think in church, a lot of times we kind of have this like, let's just let the story play out and the way that we know it does, and celebrate, which is all worth doing. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes to be able to look at this story from these different optics and stuff like that of different people who are right there.
So there's a lot of, it's in all four Gospels.
Yeah.
I mean, even the birth narratives is really just in two.
Yeah.
So, those are familiar texts that we get at Christmas. But I think that we know these texts because they come around every Easter, but we might hear it from a different gospel, just on Easter Sunday, or maybe on Good Friday or something like that. Right. I don't think I've been as attentive to these texts as I thought I had.
Yeah.
And so looking at the details of it and some of the things that she's brought out about how they are different, each four, they're the same. It's the same event, but they all have a different perspective on it.
Right.
And that's really shed some light on it for me. And I feel very prepared going into this. Next week will be Holy Week, and so
Sunday starting it off.
this Holy Week's gonna be special, I think,
Yep.
because of this journey that we've been on. So, yeah.
Real quick, just for the people listening to the podcast who maybe haven't been in service a couple weeks, you want to give them a quick rundown of Holy Week?
I think you can do that excellent.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
We'll start next Sunday is Palm Sunday, which is kind of the start of it. And then Thursday, we have a Maundy Thursday service at 7:00.
Right.
On Friday, we'll have a Stations of a Cross set up. It'll be, it's kind of a contemplative prayer time, just time for you to kind of come in and reflect on the day. And that'll be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But at noon that day, Dave's going to lead a little bit of a prayer service more so. It's not going to be like necessarily a big
There's not going to be any hymn,
worship service.
There's not going to be hymn singing. We'll make use of the screen just to give everybody a little preview.
Yeah.
And some images to reflect on, and some prayers to pray, and a few words and a few scriptures. But I think as we've been on this journey to the cross, that a lot of this will be reminding us of this journey that we've been
culmination, all
culmination
together.
of that on Good Friday. So
Yep.
yeah.
And then when really we get to Easter Sunday, where we have a sunrise service at 6:30.
This is 7. I think.
7, I'm sorry. And then we have a 9 and 11:15 service. Our 9:00 service is more contemporary.
Actually, I think they're going to both be
Okay.
pretty much the same.
See, that's why you should have done it.
Yeah.
You've been on the meetings.
I could be wrong on that. We've done that in the past.
Right.
Had one been modern and one traditional. I think they're going to be blended,
Okay.
like we do our normal 10:00 service. That's my understanding.
Got it.
We'll give you an update next week.
Okay. So we'll have 2 services, one
Yeah.
at 9, one at 11:15. And in between those, we have an Easter egg hunt for kids and families to all partake in. As they say, there's going to be a couple kids fields, and then there's going to be a field for everybody else. So we want to see you out there having a good time. And it's, if nothing else, just go out and watch the Easter egg hunt. It's so fun watching the kids run through and
So is
grab the
the
eggs.
teenager is going to be in the older one, the third
Yeah.
one? Yeah. So we're going to have to compete for eggs with like Ian and Brady and Piper.
Absolutely.
And I would lose.
That's the fun part. I think
right.
last year I just grabbed Bryce and held him for a while so other people could get eggs. So,
Yeah.
but it's a good time. We hope to see you out there at one of the services or multiple services. If I know some people like to go to the sunrise and then come to another service.
Yeah, the 7:00, Pastor Juan's going to be preaching.
Oh, great.
So will be different, but I'll be preaching the same thing at 9 and 11:15. So, choose one of those. And Easter's an incredible day.
It always
really
is.
And I'll start plugging our a little bit our next. How are we doing on time? 28 minutes.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a series after Easter on the Book of Revelation. That's you would say it a hot button issue, but I think it's time for us to look at Revelation, and so
Okay.
we'll be looking at that. The 7 churches that are mentioned there, and I'll be doing a Bible study on that on Wednesday night. So more about that later, but just get that in your calendar and your thoughts that's coming, and I've already began work on it, and it's going to be. I'm excited about preaching that series. So
Yeah. It's always, Revelation is always an interesting thing to preach on because there's just a lot to it, and there's some interpretation elements, but also, there's definitely some good lessons and stuff still pull out of it.
We'll yes.
Dive into it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, all right.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. As always, you know where to contact us if you have any questions or thoughts of anything we've talked about. We love to look through the chat sections and see some engagement there. But other than that, we hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time.
Oh, yeah. God bless.